Thank you, Mr. Nelms. Ms. Ruckman.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. And thank you, members of this committee. My name is Mindy Ruckman, and I'm here on behalf of Illinois Policy. And I'm also here on behalf of taxpayers across the state to urge this committee to reject the progressive tax. It has been less than a year since a massive income tax hike has been imposed on the taxpayers of our state. And so to push another one on its heels would be devastating for our economy. Our policy team did an analysis of various different progressive tax scenarios, and what they found, based on our analysis, is that progressive tax would not have the desired effects of raising revenues while at the same time giving lower and middle income earners a tax break. However, it would have the bad result of hindering investment in our state, which of course leads to slowdown in our economy as well as slow economic growth and employment growth as well. And this is likely why we know that a majority of Illinoisans don't want this. In fact, in the past couple weeks alone, we've collected over 30,000 signatures from people across the state declaring that they are against the progressive income tax. Many of these individuals reside in your districts. And I want to emphasize that these people who signed on to this petition, they're not just stating that they're against the progressive income tax. What they're saying is they so desperately desire the certainty that their futures in Illinois could be better than it is today. And unfortunately, the progressive tax rips away that certainty. And I know we're in we have budgeting problems right now, but we're in this problem because for too long our budgeting process has been short-sighted. And so for now, I ask, moving forward, we consider the long term, and I ask that we take to heart how in the long term a progressive tax is going to affect us down the road. And what we've seen in other states is that after a progressive tax is enacted, economic growth is slowed down, and it leads to greater income inequality, which I know none of us want. Thank you for the time. I've brought with me our chief economist, Dr. Devungi, and he'd be happy to
helping me.
He'd be happy to tell you guys more. Thank you.
Doctor, we'll allow you to testify, or do you want to just be available for questions?
I prepared a small statement.
Okay, go right ahead.
So thank you, members of this committee. I appreciate the time. As my colleague said, my name is Orphe Divungi. I serve as chief economist at the Illinois Policy Institute, and I'm a trained economist. So I have to disagree. Most economists do not agree that a progressive income tax is a good thing. So from an economic standpoint, what I can tell you is that theory and evidence stand against scrapping the state's flat income tax. Adopting a progressive income tax is one of the worst policies this committee could enact. When you compare states with a progressive income tax to states without one, we learn that states with a progressive income tax saw weaker jobs growth. States with a progressive income tax saw weaker economic growth. States with a progressive income tax also failed to reduce income inequality. There's nothing fair about inequality rising faster in states with a progressive income tax. The progressivity of the tax code actually fails to redistribute income. I heard that was one of the goals stated earlier. Uncertainty over the state's ability to curb its spending and the recent tax increases have already shrunk our economy. In 2017, labor force participation increased in other states but declined in Illinois. Illinois also saw weaker jobs growth than its neighbors, falling to 42nd place out of 50. Adopting a progressive income tax to raise more revenue is short-sighted. This shift could exacerbate the state's fiscal imbalance. Tax hikes come at a cost. There are trade-offs to consider. Regardless of who the new tax falls on, it always comes back to harm the jobless, low-income, low and middle-income families. If the objective is to raise more revenues, then a progressive income tax will constitute a tax hike. The bottom line is that a shift to a progressive income tax from our current flat tax system will take money out of people's pockets, and taking money out of people's pockets shrinks the economy. I think especially about low-income families and minorities, and minority communities will find it even more difficult to get financing. We know that's a problem. Small business owners and young entrepreneurs in the Black and Hispanic communities struggle to get financing as it is. These communities suffers first and suffer the most when cash gets taken out of the economy. To be clear, a progressive income tax is not what our state needs. The right way to raise revenues is to grow our economy, not shrink it. Thank you for the time. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Doctor. Questions from members of the committee? Representative Marwick, followed by Representative Harris, followed by Representative Evans, followed by Representative Reich,
Thank you, everyone.
followed by Representative Welch.
So I appreciate all you being here, and I appreciate your testimony. I'm going to have a few questions, but I want to start out with something that I found fascinating. So first of all, I appreciate the fact that you're all opposed to that. I think we have a philosophical divide here that, that's what we're here for, is to talk about that. But just out of curiosity, show of hands, Leader, you don't have to raise your hand on this one. Show of hands, how many people supported the raising the income tax from 3.75 to 4.95? Yeah, okay. So we'll start with that. Number two, Mr. Stats, I found it fascinating that you talked about how I keep hearing how this is going to be bad for the middle class, and yet you just told me that the problem with Illinois' income tax is that we've given too many tax breaks to individuals, meaning we've raised the personal exemptions and we've raised the earned income tax credits, and that so that's the problem with our system. So if we're to correct the problem and leave the flat tax in place, then what we should do then is raise the tax on middle income and low income individuals, if I'm going converse on what you just told me. And we should broaden the sales tax base, is what you also mentioned, which means the sales tax is the most progressive tax. And when we broaden it to services, it is borne most on the backs of the people who least can afford to pay it. So to sit there and tell me that the progressive income tax is bad, your solution is to raise taxes on the middle class and the poor.
No, that's not exactly what I said.
It is what you said,
well,
Keith. Come on.
Let me see if I can clarify.
You also said that the tax breaks offered are insignificant. So their insignificant tax breaks would be better offset by your increase on middle class folks. I don't know. I don't know how to interpret that.
Okay.
Let me just.
If I may respond.
Yeah,
I
Keith
apologize.
respond.
Go ahead, Keith.
If I may respond. If you look at the way that the tax base has eroded over the years, you see that as of fiscal year 16, $1.8 billion was not taxed under the Income Tax Act because Illinois does not tax pensions. Okay, that goes up to about $2.7 billion under the current tax rate. $1.98 billion is not taxed by virtue of the fact that the sales tax at the state level was eliminated on food, the 5%. Okay. Now, what I proposed is that I think what we can do within the bounds of the current constitutional limitations is do a comprehensive review of the tax system, including the sales tax system. In 1989, we did sales tax reform, because in 1989, there were a multiplicity of locally imposed taxes, making a complicated system with differing tax rates in differing jurisdictions. And so we went in 89, and effective in 1990, we ended up with a situation where we had a basic 6.25% rate, very few opportunities for locally imposed taxes. That's been eroded over the last 28 years to where, again, we have a multiplicity of local jurisdictions imposing taxes, extremely high tax rates. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that I think there should be a look at the tax system comprehensively, rather than just rushing off to change the Constitution to go from a flat rate tax to what's called a progressive income tax. And again, I'm not saying that that tax should be borne by the middle class and the poor. There are ways that you can adjust the exemptions under the sales tax for food, for example. There are ways that you can address pensions. I mean, does it make any sense for me to be paying no tax on the pension I receive right now for my 20 years of state service? I would submit no. Now, at the risk of getting out over my skis here with my organization, I'm
Keith, that
saying-
ship is sailing right on the ocean.
Yeah,
Be
yeah,
careful.
but that's what I'm saying, and I mean, there are a number of things that can be addressed. Now,
All
you
right.
also,
And
you
I
also.
appreciate that. We should
what-
definitely have a
let me-
comprehensive
yeah.
review of our tax
Let me
system. I
say
agree
one
with you on that.
one last thing. You had the question about, did anybody here agree with the necessity for a tax rate increase? We were opposed to it not because the chamber felt that there was not a need for additional revenue. We were opposed to the increase in taxes because there was just an increase in taxes without any changes to the status quo, which would leave us where we are today, in the same situation where even after the tax increase, there's an outcry for additional revenue.
Well, and what I would argue with you on that is that tax policy and other policy, non-tax policy, I don't think we should have accumulated all the debt we did in an attempt to force one person's ideas of what, or one party's ideas of what reforms are or not. I think that was a mistake. It doesn't require, I know you're looking to answer me, but I think it was a mistake. I don't think we should have, that is debt that goes on the back of my son, and I'm mad about it, okay? So we shouldn't have done that. We should have been responsible and balanced our budget. So let's talk about the math of budget, because I think that this is important. Can anyone here tell me first of all, let me ask this question. Does anyone think we should skip a pension payment? No, I didn't think so. We should pay our pensions because that's what got us into the mess in the first place. So if we were to pay all of our pension payments over the course of the next 27 years, okay, which is what's left in the ramp till 2045, which will end with a $18.5 billion pension payment, which is going up every year because of the way we do the math. And Steve knows what I'm talking about. And we live up to our bipartisan commitment to increase education spending by $3.5 billion over the next 10 years. And all other state funding, and I talked about the growth, state spending. I talked about the growth of state spending, which has been flat and actually declining. But just say that all other state spending grows by its historical average over the course of the next 27 years, right? So that's pay your pensions, make your commitment to fund education, and state spending remains on its historical average. And we have a 4.95% flat tax. Do you know if we can balance our budgets over the next 27 years? Does anybody know that? Can anybody answer that question?
So I can try to answer that question.
Actually, I know what the answer is.
What is?
I know what the answer is
what
because I asked the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability, nonpartisan group that serves our government, currently staffed by a former Republican staffer, led by a former Republican staffer. So you know it's bipartisan in its analysis. If we live up to our commitments and we increase spending as we have in other states' funding, not pensions, not the increase in education, but that follows its historical trend, we will fall, by 2045, we will fall a cumulative $225 billion short of balancing our budgets. Not only will we do that, I asked them as well, if we were to balance our budgets, which that's what we're all here for, is fiscal responsibility, I think we all agree to that, what would be the tax rate we would need to balance our budgets over the course of the next 27 years?
Hey, Rob, hold on one second, Representative. You posed a question. The doctor,
I know, but I'm in the middle of something, Mike. I respectfully, let me finish this, and then I will give the basis for them to answer the question.
Okay. Fair enough.
All right. So I asked what would be the tax rate that we need, a flat tax, in order to balance the budget, and they told me that in order to balance the budgets over the course of the next 27 years, we would need to adopt, as of January 1st, 2019, a 6.45% flat income tax. Okay. Now, this is not ideology, it's not speculation, it's mathematics. And so if we are taxing at 4.95%, but spending at 6.45%, we are basically taking that last 1.5% and running it on a credit card for my son to pay in 27 years. Now, I don't want to do that. So the question that I have is, what's the solution, right? Because 6.45% is the flat tax necessary. So if we don't want a progressive tax, are we willing to agree to that?
So I'm going to try to answer the question to best my ability. So I'd say they're wrong about the tax rate that you pointed to. And the reason why I'm saying that is because since everybody's talking about famous economists, I'll quote one of my favorite famous economists, James Mirrlees. In 1971, he won a Nobel Prize in economics. And he said that when a tax system aims to redistribute income from high ability to low ability individuals, the tax system should provide sufficient incentive for high income taxpayers to keep producing at the high levels that correspond to their ability. This is because higher taxes would discourage them from exerting as much effort to earn that income. The truth is that individuals respond to prices, they respond to economic policy, and so raising the tax rate would actually cause economic activity to decrease, exacerbating the fiscal imbalance. We can't rely on static estimates, especially considering this is a very serious issue. And so I'd say the 6.45% is actually a wrong tax rate.
And so, to be fair, Doctor, they also said that every year that we fail to enact the 6.45 will necessitate larger and larger tax increases. And in fact, they said that it could be somewhere in the need of 7.5 to 8.5 if we don't raise revenue or cut spending or do something. And mind you, they weren't. The COGFA does not advocate. They just gave us numbers. They gave me a number. I asked, what's the state of it, right? So it's $225 billion shortfall. We either have to cut our way out of it, we have to tax our way out of it, we have to grow our way out of it, and we have to find a combination, right? That's what this is about, is what's the best combination. But as everyone sits there today, Mindy, you said we got to think about the long-term effects in the future. I'm thinking about my 19-year-old son. I don't want him to pay 8.5% flat tax.
If I may, you mentioned the increase in the tax rate. However, after adjusting for inflation, income tax receipts net of refunds have increased 45% over the last decade. Again, over the last decade, adjusting for inflation, property taxes have increased 12%. And so taxpayers are doing their part already. And so, there are commitments that have been made. But, in terms of how do we find the new revenue, taxpayers have already done their part. We need to grow. We lost our title of the 5th most populous state. This great city is about to lose its title as the nation's 3rd largest city to Houston in the next few years. U-Haul tells us that 60% of the people they move out of Illinois have an income of greater than $100,000 per year.
And I get that. We're repeating talking points. Mr. Nelms, with all due respect, I asked COGFA, and they gave me numbers. They didn't say one way or the other,
Sure.
But the numbers that they gave us say that the ability of us to simply grow our way out of this would require growth that would exceed our historical 30-year growth by triple. It's not going to happen, right? So if we're talking about realities, I want to talk about a $225 billion projected budget shortfall and what we need to solve that, right? I don't want to talk about U-Haul. I want to talk about, you came here to oppose this. This is one plan, right? I will tell you, as you sit up there, right? I'm the guy who's for progressive income tax. I also signed on to a cuts-only budget last year because I don't want to see, that's right, I signed on to a cuts-only budget last year. I don't want to see any more debt. I don't want to see any more deficits because that's going on the backs of my son, and I don't want it. So $225 billion. You can't grow your way out of it. What's the solution?
May I respond?
Please. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that you make such a point to talk about the future, because that's exactly what we should be doing, because not only is that your son's future, that's my future. It's also my little sister's future. And so the reason that probably all of us are here is what we're trying to say is that this is a policy that affects behavior. And Orfe can probably say it a lot more, Dr. Duvungi can probably say it a lot more eloquently than I can, but it affects behavior. And so what we're trying to say is the progressive tax will divert investment that we desperately need in our state, and it'll divert growth that we desperately need. You're right, if we sit and do nothing, we are gonna have a problem. We already have a problem, let's be real. And so what we're okay, go ahead.
I apologize. I thought you were done.
No, all I was going to say is what we're disagreeing here, we're not saying that there's not a problem. So please don't tell us that we're just sitting with our heads in the sand. What we're disagreeing on is what kind of policy is going to get us out of this. And we're saying that a progressive tax, based on what we see in other states, is not the answer. So I hope that gives a more well-rounded answer to
It
what
does,
our intentions
and I
are.
appreciate it. And Mr. Chairman, this is my last statement, then I'll be done. And I want to say it to all of you. I appreciate the discussion and the dialogue, and Jan, for what it's worth, about the sarcasm and some of these guys are my dearest friends in the legislature. We have great discussions. That's what this is about. As long as, when we stop talking, it's a problem, right? We're talking, and that's the most important thing. We're trying to find solutions. And I respect differences of opinion. I really do. But this is about, so we ask tough questions because we've got tough problems. The only thing that I would tell you last, Mindy, and I'll respond to this. The members of this Revenue Committee have sat in committee. And I was in a committee where we had economists from Nuveen, S&P Global Services, and they sat before us. And a question was asked by one of my colleagues. Isn't it true that people are leaving the state and they're not investing in the state because of our high taxes? And the answer was an emphatic absolutely not. People are leaving the state. People are not investing in the state. They're not opening businesses because there is no certainty for tomorrow. And what we need to do is stop accumulating debt, improve our credit ratings, and provide for certainty for the future. Now, with all respect, Doctor, we can disagree on economic policy, but math is math. There's no Republican math. There's no Democratic math. We have to solve the mathematical problem so that businesses know that they can trust that Illinois is on a path to a brighter future.
Okay.
And thank you. I'm done.
May I?
Briefly for a response, and then we're going to set the table for the rest of this hearing. Go ahead, Doctor.
So Representative Martwick, you're right. There's no Republican math and no Democratic math. You're invited to my office to talk about these issues. So I had one more thing to say about certainty. You're right, uncertainty about Springfield's ability to curb its spending and the impending tax hikes that these problems basically investors fear is a problem. And that's why investment is lower in Illinois than it's ever been before. And a progressive tax is not the way forward.
Okay. We have members who have to leave, but I am not inclined to open the roll on this particular resolution. So we have 3 remaining questioners. We're going to limit your questions to 1 question apiece, and then we're going to go to I have a question for the minority spokesman, and then we're going to go to a vote. So Representative Wright, go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Bevonier, is that right? Question. In this entire conversation, we've seemed to have sloughed over the issue of migration. Obviously, our ability to collect revenue is based upon labor elasticity. Have you examined any of the issues dealing with in-migration and out-migration and the relative incomes of those who are out-migrating versus in-migrating into the state of Illinois, please?
So we've seen the data. It's clear that those who leave tend to earn more than those who come in. And it's consistent with economic theory. States that tax income or business capital will deter investments. And of course, high earners, high ability individuals will respond by either decreasing their labor supply, we talked about elasticities, or moving.
Okay, thank you, Representative Reich. Representative Evans.
Thank you, and I'll be as quick as possible. Just quickly, I got to get back to some of your comments with regards to COGFA. We know the $225 billion over the next 27 years and the $6.5 billion needed to balance. Are you officially saying on the record that you oppose, or are you discrediting COGFA's analysis of what we need? That was quoted by Representative Martwick.
So I'm not discrediting anyone. I'm telling you that most economists don't believe that
Do you believe COCFA? I mean, answer the question simply. COCFA put out information. We try to believe COCFA. We work with COCFA. Are you saying COCFA is incorrect?
No, I'd love to see the report, and I'd love to see their methodology.
Can I respond?
Yeah, please.
No, and I mean, I haven't looked at it, so I can't really attest to it, and I'm not a spokesperson for them, but I'm sure that they're looking at the projections based on what our mandates are now, what our finances are now. So what we recommend, and I don't want to rabbit trail us, but I'll just say it for the record, is reforms to prevent those projections from happening down the road. So that's all.
Yeah, and I think we've had issues with the idea of cutting away. Just lastly, we know progressive income tax, graduated tax, whatever you want to call it, has been in effect since 1911 when Wisconsin was the first state. Do you generally, just across the board, oppose progressive or graduated income taxing just as a tax model? Do you oppose a federal policy of graduated income taxing? Do you oppose every state? I know you mentioned a third, but realistically, we know it's 33 states, so a lot of states are using it. Do you believe each and every one of those states should go to a flat tax and that the federal government should look to a flat tax?
Tax policy would be a lot easier if there was a one-size-fits-all model, but there isn't. And so it's not the very essence of a graduated income tax that we oppose, but it's the implementation here in Illinois. And I would offer up as a cautionary tale the great state of New Jersey. In the 1960s, they were dealing with crippling property taxes. And so in an effort to alleviate them, they implemented a state sales tax. And a decade later, in the 1970s, yet again, in an effort to alleviate the crippling property taxes, they implemented a graduated state income tax. Well, here we are over 50 years later, and New Jersey is still dealing with crippling property taxes. In fact, theirs are the only property taxes in the nation that ours are second to. They're neck and neck with us for outbound migration, and they're also neck and neck with us for unfunded public pension liability. And so a graduated income tax is not a silver bullet to a state's solutions. And at the federal level, I mentioned all the trouble that implementing graduated income tax can cause. And at the federal level, after the implementation of the 16th Amendment in 1913, Congress implemented 7 income tax brackets ranging from 1% to 7%. And just 5 years later, there were 55 brackets ranging from 5% to 77%. And by the time President John F. Kennedy called for tax reduction in his 1963 State of the Union address, the top marginal rate was 91%. And so that's why I say, there's a lot of injustice and folly that can come with a graduated income tax.
Not to speak up again, but so your question was, do we believe that a progressive income tax in itself is bad policy?
For sure. Because there's 33 states, a vast majority of states throughout the country are utilizing this. Are they all incorrect? Should they all move to a flat tax? Yeah,
so for a simple answer, yes, a progressive tax is bad policy. However, these other states, and California is one of them, they have other good economic reforms, or policies, I should say, that make them more business-friendly and make them a better and friendlier place for taxpayers to be. And the progressive tax is not one of those. So if we want to be like our neighbors or be like California, then we need to enact good reforms and good policies first.
So the issue is not the tax, whether it's graduated or progressive, it's other issues. So again, we're here talking about one thing. We're talking about whether or not we go graduated or flat. You're saying graduated flat is not a problem, it's all of the other issues.
No, let me clarify. Progressive tax is a problem in itself, but what we're trying to say is that the world economy does not exist in a box. And so there are a lot of things that affect how the economy of a state is going to be. And so the progressive tax in itself is bad policy, but these other states who are doing better than us, it's because they have a lot better policies that are outweighing that one bad policy. When we look at our neighbor states, we should probably look at the good policies, not the one bad policy they have. To clarify, that's what I mean.
Okay. Representative, is it okay if we go to a couple more questioners?
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Evans. Okay. Spokesperson Harris, followed by Representative Welch. Representative Worley's our closer, and then we're going to a vote.
All right, I'll be very brief. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stats, how much does the individual income tax bring in?
Oh, I have
So
this-
it brings
yeah.
in, the estimate is $17 billion according to COG. How much does the sales tax bring in? It's about 8, half of that. My point is,
Yeah.
if you're not looking at the individual income tax in terms of revenue for the state of Illinois, either up or down, you can change it somewhat on the sales tax, but you're not going to get anywhere near what the individual income tax does. Did I hear you say that you support taxing retirement income? I thought that's what I heard you say.
Yeah.
Okay, let me move on, though, very briefly. Just 2 quick questions for the individuals, Mr. Nelms and Ms. Ruckman. Did you support the education reform bill that was passed?
We did not have an official position on that. We certainly were in favor of components of it.
Okay. You answered Representative Martinwitz's question about whether or not you supported the tax, the budget and the tax increase that was passed last year for this budget year. Do you, both of you, individual question to both of you, right now the estimate is for FY18 that our revenue is going to be in the vicinity of $37 to $37.5 billion. Do you believe that the state of Illinois could provide the services that the citizens expect in the state of Illinois, from social services to state police to agriculture to natural resources to all those things that we fund, pensions, of course, being a burden? Do you believe that we could do that on $32.5 billion, which is what we would bring in without the income tax increase?
Sure. Well, I think it's a bit of a false dilemma because people have alluded to the fact that there are ways for us to economize and do things more
In other words, you think we could cut $4.5 billion out of the state budget?
Again, we need to address the way we spend money and what we're spending money on. I mean, for instance, our
Okay.
friend Adam
All right.
Andrzejewski will tell us
Thank you. Ms. Ruckman,
63,000.
do you have an opinion?
Yeah, so Illinois Policies put out Budget Solutions book with a balanced budget every year, and I wish I had the mental capacity to remember all of it, so I can't give that in-depth of an analysis. However, we would be happy to talk with you about it and
Sure.
share that information with you.
Sure, and so you think that you could run the state of Illinois on $32.5 billion. And I, believe it or not, I actually read the Illinois Policy Institute's book that you put out, and if I'm not mistaken, one of the suggestions is that you eliminate, or that the legislature would eliminate the local government distributive fund, which is roughly $1.2 billion. We could do that. We could bring in 1.2 or keep $1.2 billion if we didn't give anything to the municipalities. There might just be a little bit of resistance to that, I think, but don't get me wrong. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Welch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. I had a bunch of questions, but I'll just make a quick statement. There's been a lot of quotes thrown around here today, and as we prepare to leave, I want to quote Luke 12:48. For unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall much be required. I believe that's exactly what a fair tax represents. You know, those who are doing well should want to and should be required to give back. I also want to refer you all to take a look at a book called Sense and Sensibility, written by well-renowned economist and president of Northwestern University, Morty Shapiro, called Sense and Sensibility, What Economics Can Learn from Humanities. And one of the case studies in that book talks about how to address higher education among the many issues. And if we don't start addressing the humanities through our policies, we are going to continue to see people leaving the state of Illinois. What this panel has been talking about here this afternoon is absolute nonsense. And we have to do what's right for this state and make the right decisions. And I truly believe that is requiring those who much is given to do the right thing to help us fix our state. Thank you.
Representative Worley.
Sorry, can I comment on that last one?
Doc, very, very briefly, and then we're going to go to Representative Worley.
No, absolutely. So just like you, sir, I believe that education should be well-funded, but I worry about the returns to schooling. So what good is a college degree if you can't find a job? And we see the returns to schooling decrease throughout the U.S. economy, throughout the USA, but decrease faster in Illinois than anywhere else after the tax increase. And so we saw a lot of people leave the state to places that paid better for their hard-earned investment in human capital. So that's the only comment I had. Thank you.
Representative Worley.
Thank you, Chairman. Keith, I want to make sure I heard this correctly. Is it your position that you'd be in favor of taxing retirement income, or is it the Chamber's position that we should tax retirement income?
I think well, I should say it's my position that this is part of what should be looked at as a comprehensive review of the state tax structure. As I said, I may be a bit over my skis. I'm not attributing that to the chamber, but I was responding to the representative's question about the things that we could look to as an alternative to going to a graduated tax rate structure.
Okay, thank you. Now, just a brief comment is we heard earlier that we're here to just focus on the progressive income tax, and that's part of the problem that emanates from Springfield as we take things in isolation. You want part of a comprehensive solution. We talk about the budget, and it's anything but. Sooner, and everybody up here knows the fiscal morass that we find ourselves in a state. We're not going to get out of this with just a progressive income tax, period. We're not going to get out of this unless we actually are serious about reforms and looking at other measures of success throughout the other states. So, yes, this is the issue before us. Yes, I'm opposed to it, but the math indicates that we all need to kind of knock it off and come up with a solution, and not in another year. It's an election year. Nothing's going to happen. Our budget, if we get one, will be questionable. It's a lost year in the state of Illinois, and I'm sorry, time value of money and just common sense, we can't afford to waste another day. So that's why I was a little frustrated earlier with the lack of question time, but I understand. But we gotta come together with a solution. Just simply throwing more money at it is not it.
Thank you, Representative Worley. Thank you for your testimony today, everybody. It was enlightening. Spokesperson Harris, I'm going to ask you to waive the reading of the 1,612 proponents, the 1,979 opponents, and believe it or not, there are 8 people who have no position on this bill. Or this resolution.
I want to know who those 8 people are. I want to talk to them. That's fine, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Leave.
Thank you, Spokesperson.